Here's another synopsis from our live on Facebook and YouTube that we discussed today. And this one has many points in it that we discussed at length that began my journey of asking questions. And some of it I didn't get an answer until later. So this one is going to be a little bit long. So buckle on up. Buckle on up. So all in this one story, there's a couple of questions. He said, then a young man came and asked Jesus and came up to Jesus and asked, Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life? Jesus' response, why do you ask me about what is good? Jesus replied, there is only one who is good. Now stop right there. There is only one who is good. This was one of those things where I was saying, well, if Jesus is God, then should not Jesus say that he is good? But Jesus said there is only one that is good, definitely creating a separation between himself and who he would call the Father, called the God. So therefore, Jesus and God are not one. So this was a question that made me ask or question the Trinity, because Jesus is here saying this. Now I know a lot of people are going to come back and they're going to say, well, in John, he said that I and the Father am one. But then later on in John, he also says in the same chapter that him and the disciples are one as well. So does that mean that they're all one? That the disciples are also part of this Trinity? That everyone is part of this Trinity who believes in this, believes in this Bible, believes in this book? So that was one of the questions that we discussed at length today in our lives. The other one, as we continue, he said that if you want to enter life, keep the commandments. Meaning that if you want eternal life, keep the commandments. Every time a person tells me that, oh, because of Jesus, we don't have to keep the commandments, a bullshit. A bullshit. Yes, you do. You got Jesus right here is telling you that you got to keep those commandments, because remember also, it was your Jesus who said that I came not to destroy the old or destroy the law or destroy the prophets, but to fulfill it. And he didn't take one tittle. If anyone takes one tittle away from this book, then that is blasphemy. That is not what you're supposed to do. So Jesus right here is telling you that you are to keep the commandments. So stop wearing mixed linen. You're supposed to stone certain people to death. You're not supposed to sit on the same beds as your wife or any woman when she's on her menstrual cycle. You're supposed to keep all those commandments. Remember that. Okay, all the genocides, everything. Keep them commandments. Otherwise, you're not being a good Christian. Let's continue. We got deep into that one. The man then asked, which ones he inquired. Jesus replied, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, you shall not give false testimony. And you can say that these are the only ones. Honor your father and mother. You can say, since these are the only ones that Jesus named, then those are the only ones that you have to keep, and you don't have to let that bus roll by. Keep the rest of these commandments. So he specifically named certain ones, but he was naming those because he was giving the young man an idea, because obviously, according to the story, Jesus had some pre-knowledge and what he was going to go at. And he said to love your neighbor as you love yourself. All right, we know Christians don't do this. Y'all do not love your neighbor as you love yourself, because our prisons are filled with Christians and Muslims. Our most crimes are committed by Christians and Muslims in America. That we know who commit the majority of the crimes. They believe in this religion. So we know we're not loving our neighbors. We love ourselves. We know that they are doing some stealing, killing, and all these other things. So we know that they're not following this. And sure, somebody will say, well, those are not real Christians. But everybody always claims that anybody else is not a real Christian. But I can claim that anybody who responds to this is not a real Christian either, because there are a lot of commandments that you're not keeping. The young man then says that all these I have kept. And what do I still need to do? What do I still lack? This was an interesting one. This one really got my goat when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, on up to when I was in Israel at 20 years old. Jesus answered, if you want to be perfect, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Then come follow me. And when the young man heard this, he went away, sad, because he had great wealth. Later on, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he tells his disciples, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. It was too long. That's why I didn't put it in there. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven. Growing up poor, and I was poor. I'm talking about we had years with no food and had to go to other family members' houses to eat. We had years where all we had was bedrooms furniture and no other furniture in the house. My mom did the best she could with what she had. There were years where if it wasn't for other people, we wouldn't have been able to live even a decent life, living where we did live. So I was against being poor. Poor was not how I was going to live my life. So I needed to become rich. I needed wealth. But it was explained to me that once I had seen a camel in Desert Storm and seen a camel in Oman, that I saw the size of a camel. And then when I got to Israel and going through this tour, we're leaving the Muslim market, heading to the Wailing Wall. And the gentleman said, we are now passing through the Eye of a Needle. 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide. Just saw a camel a couple of weeks ago. Of course, a camel can walk through here. What the hell? What the hell? Because when I was a kid, I used to try to say, well, if I liquefy the camel and I get a big sewing needle, maybe I can strain the camel through the sewing needle. These are the thinkings of a child. But I was thinking that I could do that. But then I come to realize, because this gentleman named David Assid was standing there and he said, look, I know you're a Christian. I know you probably are perplexed by this camel of the eye and needle thing. And he explained to me that what they would have meant back then is because the camels carried all your personal possessions and you rode the camel, you would not be able to ride a camel through this gate. You would not be able to, the camel wouldn't fit in the width through there if you had great wealth, because the camel would be loaded with all of your possessions. So what this is really saying is that you have to be able to not be in love with your possessions and not worship your possessions, nor ride on your high horse, for an American terminology, in order to enter the gates of heaven. So it is possible that you just can't be a person who is in love with material things, which is something that I've never been anyway. So it made it easy for me because I love experiences way more than I love personal possessions. So but I asked this question to several pastors over the years in my youth, and of course, this is before the internet was ever widely developed into what it is today. So most of them could not answer this question in that way because they had a Western psychology towards the Bible, which then made me start questioning how people were looking at this Bible based on the current day culture and their Western mindset, not understanding how things were back then. So therefore they couldn't truly understand this book. So it caused me a lot of questions, and I asked a lot of questions from that time on. Questions had to be asked. And I ask you to do the exact same thing today, to take the most minor thing in this book and ask questions. Because if you don't ever ask questions, then you're never really going to get a true answer, because all you're doing is following in the same mindset of those who came before you, who are believing in doctrines that have been changed over generation after generation. You should ask these questions about keeping these commandments. You should ask these questions about holding on to material things and whether or not a rich person can enter the gates of heaven. I had one person who was very close and near and dear to me. They turned down opportunities that could have made them a fortune. But they turned down those opportunities because they were always taught that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than it is for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven. And they were very distraught and very angry with me when I taught them what it really means, that they could have taken those opportunities, just not fall in love with their wealth, not falling in love with the material things. And even as a person who has walked away from religion, I still would tell people never to fall in love with earthly attachments. You can never become the greatest version of yourself if earthly attachments are still holding you to this material world, this matter plane of existence, this gross matter plane of existence. So in all things, you have to always remember you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.